welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging really headfirst into some truly challenging and frankly quite staggering claims. We're looking at the global financial system, hidden power structures, even existential risks, all through the lens of Catherine Fitt's work.
Right, and Catherine Fitz brings such a unique viewpoint, doesn't she? Because she wasn't just, watching from the outside. She was Assistant Secretary of Housing in the U.S., a partner at Dillon Read, a major investment bank.
Inside the machine.
Exactly, she was inside the system. So her analysis, it comes from decades of her own research, sure, but also her direct personal experiences within these worlds.
Okay, so our goal here, our mission in this deep dive, is really to unpack some of Catherine Fitt's most compelling and, sometimes pretty difficult insights. We want to help you navigate the picture she paints about how she thinks things really operate behind the scenes.
Yeah, we'll be digging into her views on, well, the big push for digital control. Those just eye-popping amounts of money she claims have vanished from government books.
Trillions, we're talking.
Trillions, yeah. And then there are these unsettling ideas about secret underground facilities, and maybe surprisingly, her perspective on what true wealth actually means in this kind of environment.
Okay, let's start with that core assertion from Catherine Fitz, the one about digital control. She argues there's this very deliberate, long-running effort by governments, by powerful groups globally, to shift everything currency commerce into the digital realm.
Right. And crucially, she doesn't see this as just, tech progress or making things convenient. She sees a much deeper and, frankly, more disturbing purpose behind it.
Which is?
Her claim is that they're fundamentally converting the currency system into a control system. She uses that incredibly strong phrase, digital concentration camp, to describe the end game she foresees.
Wow. A digital concentration camp. That definitely gets your attention. How does she see that kind of control actually working? What's the mechanism?
Well, it boils down to the ability to surveil and then control and even influence people at an incredibly detailed level, like one person at a time. She talks about AI and software enabling essentially custom-built control systems for individuals.
Custom control systems.
Yeah, systems that can monitor you, predict behavior, nudge you, influence choices, and ultimately enforce compliance.
And the enforcement, the teeth of it, comes back to controlling the money itself.
Precisely. If you control someone's access to their own funds, you have this immense power to enforce rules, mandates, whatever. She pointed to the pandemic, suggesting a future where, say, your compliance with some mandate could literally determine if your digital cash or your cards even work.
And she actually quoted someone high up in the global financial system on this, didn't she?
She did, yeah. She often brings up a quote attributed to the general manager of the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS. She calls the BIS the central bank for central banks, basically the ones coordinating this digital push. And the quote she uses is something like, "The beauty of this is we can set the rules on how your money works and we have the technology to enforce them." She sees that as a chillingly honest admission of intent.
That's quite something. And she thinks there's a deadline they're aiming for.
Fitz believes there's a major coordinated push to get this kind of comprehensive digital control system largely up and running globally, or at least in key parts of the world, by 2030.
2030. Okay. So that's the potential digital future she's warning about. Let's pivot now to something she says is deeply rooted in the current system, which is massive money laundering. Fitz makes this incredibly bold claim that the U.S. economy, its financial system, is effectively the world leader in laundering illicit funds.
Yeah, the global leader.
Yeah.
And the scale she suggests is just enormous, anywhere from $500 billion up to maybe over $1 trillion a year. And crucially, she argues this isn't some fringe problem. She sees it as deeply integrated into the core financial plumbing.
Right. And she used that very striking red button scenario to illustrate why it's so hard to stop. Can you just walk us through that again?
It's a really telling story. She described posing a question to a group focused on, I think, spiritual growth. The question was, would you push a big red button if it instantly stopped all global hard narcotics trafficking?
Okay, simple enough on the surface.
But then she added the catch. Stopping the drug trade would also instantly stop the massive flow of laundered money connected to it.
That would have consequences. Financial consequences.
Exactly. Huge ones. She laid it out. Money would flood out of financial centers like New York. Financing government debt would become incredibly difficult. Taxes would likely shoot up. Government checks might stop or be delayed.
Your retirement funds.
Right. Things like 401ks, IRAs, those would likely take a major hit. So that was the choice. Stop the devastating drug trade, but face potentially severe personal financial pain.
And this group focused on higher ideals. What did they choose?
Well, she said 99 out of 100 people told her they would not push the button. 99%.
99% chose not to stop the drug trade because of the financial fallout.
Oh.
That's a powerful insight. What's Finn's takeaway from that?
It's profound, really. She argues the biggest hurdle isn't just, catching the bad guys externally. It's the collective unwillingness within the system, within the society, that indirectly benefits from that money flow to accept the personal financial hit that stopping it might entail.
We don't want our taxes up. We don't want the checks to stop. We don't want our retirement accounts to crash.
That's the core of it, in her view. So the system persists, she argues, because disrupting it financially is feared more than the immense human cost of the activity itself.
And she links this to a fundamental principle, something about how you can't really build lasting wealth this way.
Yeah, she's very strong on this. You cannot achieve true sustainable wealth or build a healthy society by, as she puts it, liquidating your children or poisoning your people. But she argues the current system, by enabling things like the drug trade and laundering the proceeds, is effectively doing just that, while many look away due to that financial entanglement or fear.
Okay, this feels like a natural transition to maybe the most mind-boggling claim Catherine Fitz makes. The idea of trillions, with a T, trillions of dollars just gone missing from official government accounts.
Right. This is where her work, often with economist Dr. Mark Skidmore, gets into territory that's hard for many people to even process. They documented what they called undocumentable adjustments. Basically, accounting entries made to make the books balance, but without any actual records of the transactions themselves. $21 trillion. Between fiscal years 1998 and 2015, primarily within the U.S. Department of Defense, the DoD, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD.
And she points out this wasn't totally unknown, mentioning Donald Rumsfeld just before 9/11.
Exactly. Days before the 9/11 attacks, Rumsfeld, who was Secretary of Defense then, publicly stated the Pentagon couldn't account for something like $2.3 trillion in transactions just for the previous year. He famously called the Pentagon's financial mess worse than terrorism. Fitz claims her own work digging into this missing money was significantly disrupted right after 9/11.
She also views the Patriot Act, passed after 9/11, through this financial lens, calling it something like the Control and Concentration of Cash Flow Act.
Yes. Her argument is that in the name of fighting terrorism, policies were put in place that dramatically increased classified spending and deliberately made financial flows much more opaque. It became far harder for Congress, let alone the public, to track where huge sums were actually going.
She identifies a very specific, kind of obscure administrative rule as a key tool for this alleged financial secrecy, something called SAB Statement 56.
This is a really critical piece of her analysis, and deeply concerning if she's right. ASAB Statement 56 governs federal accounting standards. She claims this statement, which she says was issued quietly around the time of the Kavanaugh hearings, effectively creates a legal loophole.
A loophole for what?
She argues it allows a secret group appointed non-transparently to essentially classify financial information and remove expenditures from public disclosure, potentially overriding constitutional requirements about public funds, existing laws, everything.
So if that's true, it means the official published financial statement
Become effectively meaningless, yeah.
Yeah.
For government agencies, for big banks involved. If you're trying to follow the money, she says this policy makes it impossible to see the real picture. The numbers you do see might not reflect where huge amounts are actually flowing.
And this concept of hidden finances, of money moving off the books, links directly to her theory of a financial coup against the traditional U.S. government.
Yes, exactly. Fitz posits this really fundamental shift occurred. She points back to the failure of the 1995 budget agreement as a kind of turning point. She believes a powerful, unelected group basically decided the traditional way of governing wasn't working and opted to, in her words, re-engineer government on the just do it method.
And just doing it involved taking the money.
That's her argument. Starting around fiscal 1998, which is precisely when those huge undocumentable adjustments she tracked begin, she believes they started systematically pulling vast sums out of the public system. This put the traditional government structure in a debt trap while they simultaneously built this parallel system and pushed toward the digital control grid we talked about earlier.
So this missing money, this hidden re-engineering, is this where the idea of a breakaway civilization comes in?
That's the term, often credited to researcher Richard Dolan. Fitz suggests this missing $21 trillion, and maybe more, could be funding the construction of a completely parallel system. advanced technologies, hidden infrastructure, operations entirely separate from public view and accountability. A kind of civilization within a civilization, operating outside established laws, financed by these untracked funds.
Wow. Okay, so given that backdrop, Fitz argues the huge U.S. national debt isn't really the core issue, it's just a symptom. What does she see as the underlying problem then?
She says the fundamental economic model itself is just not economic. It's not sustainable, not productive in a healthy sense. And a huge driver of the expense side, she argues, is what she terms the great poisoning.
The great poisoning.
Yeah, her idea that the population is increasingly unhealthy, unproductive, due to, well, environmental toxins, poor nutrition, pharmaceuticals, etc. This, she says, leads to absolutely skyrocketing healthcare costs that are blowing holes in budgets at every level, from families right up to huge federal agencies like Health and Human Services. It's an unsustainable drain.
She also has a pretty provocative take on globalization,
Yeah.
framing it almost as a conflict between central bankers versus the West.
Right. She echoes a warning made way back in 1994 by Sir James Goldsmith. The idea is that maybe globalization wasn't just allowed to happen, but was deliberately used to hollow out the middle class, damage local economies, and weaken the cultural fabric in Western nations.
And why would they do that?
The alleged purpose, in her view, was to centralize capital and consolidate power for other hidden agendas. Things like perhaps funding secret space programs or preparing for some kind of major future reset event.
And she connects the recent trend of deglobalization to inflation.
She does. She suggests that particularly since around 2008, as countries like the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa started trying to build alternatives and move away from the dollar system, that process began fracturing global supply chains. And that disruption, she argues, is a major underlying cause of the inflationary pressures we've experienced.
What about major institutions like, say, American universities? She doesn't spare them either.
No, she's quite critical. She generally sees them as bloated, inefficient, often promoting ideologies over useful skills, and ultimately a poor investment for many families looking for real education. She argues they're failing to produce enough human capital people with the integrity, the critical thinking, the practical skills needed to actually manage complex systems effectively, whether in government or business. She even flags entities like the Harvard Endowment, not just as an educational institution, but as a massive, influential investment syndicate within this larger system.
Okay, let's shift again to another area of Catherine Fitz's work that really stretches the boundaries for many people.
Yeah.
This idea of vast, secret underground infrastructure.
Right. This builds directly on the breakaway civilization idea funded by the missing money. She claims there's been this massive, mostly secret construction boom of underground bases and potentially even high-speed transit systems, both in the U.S. and globally.
How many are we talking?
Well, she cites research from her own Solari report community, estimating over 170 significant underground facilities in the U.S. alone. Now, some underground facilities are known, they're documented national security sites, but she alleges the scale, the number, and the secrecy surrounding many more goes far beyond that. She points to investigative reports like Top Secret America, which documented a huge expansion of classified infrastructure after 9/11 and the Patriot Act.
And the possible reasons for building all this underground, what's the alleged purpose?
She mentions a few possibilities. One is preparing to survive potential near-extinction level events, geophysical catastrophes maybe. Another is supporting highly advanced, potentially secret space programs that operate outside public knowledge. She even shares anecdotes she's heard from contractors who worked on bizarre, deep underground projects they couldn't identify on any map.
And she adds a sort of spiritual or maybe symbolic interpretation to building underground.
Yes, it's a striking comment she makes. She suggests that choosing to build so extensively down, in secret, away from the surface, metaphorically implies being on the wrong side, a choice for darkness and secrecy over operating openly in the light, so to speak.
If these vast facilities exist, how are they powered? Conventional energy grids are traceable. She talks about breakthrough energy, doesn't she?
Exactly. Fitz believes it's highly likely that independent, off-grid energy sources, breakthrough energy technologies that aren't part of the public infrastructure, are used to power these secret projects because, as you said, conventional power leaves a trail.
Why haven't we seen these breakthrough technologies released publicly then, if they exist?
Well, she discusses the perceived risks from the perspective of those in control. Potential weaponization is one concern. Another is that cheap, abundant energy could fuel, uncontrolled economic and population growth, which would be, well, inconvenient for anyone trying to maintain tight control over resources and people. She mentioned a specific company, Brilliant Light Power, as one example she knows someone invested in, suggesting these technologies are real but deliberately kept under wraps.
Okay, so wrapping up this section on causes, consequences, and risks. Fitz has a view on what the really informed people are worried about, beyond maybe the mainstream headlines.
That's right. She argues that the truly well-informed, well-connected people she interacts with are often less focused on, say, human-caused climate change from suburban living, and more concerned about potentially bigger cyclical risks.
Like what?
Things like significant solar minimums periods of low solar activity that historically correlate with major climate shifts, agricultural disruption, economic hardship, or even larger-scale geophysical events, potential near-extinction cycles that seem to occur on roughly 10,000 or 12,000-year timescales, maybe related to pole shifts or other major Earth changes. They see these as the more profound, potentially imminent existential threats.
Okay, so after painting this really challenging, frankly quite dark picture of control systems missing trillions, hidden bases, and huge risks, it's absolutely critical we talk about Catherine Fitt's perspective on solutions. What can individuals actually do? How does she frame building true wealth?
Well, the first step she always emphasizes is facing reality. However difficult it is, you have to understand the landscape she's describing. You can't navigate it if you don't acknowledge it. From there, she offers a framework not just for financial wealth, but for what she calls integrated living wealth.
And she has 6 pillars for this integrated wealth. Can you walk us through them?
Sure, it's a really holistic view. First, a free and inspired life. Basically, understanding your own unique purpose and your connection to, well, the creator or something larger than yourself.
Okay.
Second, navigation tools. This is crucial. It's knowing the difference between official reality, the story you're told, and actual reality, how things really work, especially when managing your time and money, and crucially, not confusing the two.
Right. Don't manage your money based on the official story if it's not accurate.
Exactly. Third is risk management. In what she sees as a very dangerous environment, prioritizing lowering your risk is more vital than chasing high financial returns. Survival first. Fourth is living equity. This is about investing in living things, your relationships, family, community, culture, skills, knowledge, things that grow and sustain life.
Things that aren't just numbers on a screen.
Precisely. Fifth is financial equity. That's the traditional part, your stocks, bonds, real estate, cash. It's still a pillar, but only one of 6. And sixth is turtle fourth. It means perseverance. Never give up. Recognize that feelings of hopelessness or despair can actually be psychological operations ops designed to make you quit. Keep moving, even slowly, like a turtle.
That idea of living equity, especially what she calls the people bank, seems really central, and it came directly from her own intense personal experience, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's rooted in that incredibly tough 11-year battle she had fighting the government. She went through, I think, 18 audits and investigations, 12 separate lawsuits, smear campaigns, even physical harassment.
It's just unbelievable pressure.
Immense. And through all that, she said she learned very clearly who was really there for her, who she could count on when the system turned against her. And it wasn't institutions. It was her people, family, friends, her community. That's the people bank.
And she demonstrated how much she valued that bank in a very concrete way, involving a settlement offer.
She did. It's a powerful story. The government offered her a $500,000 settlement to basically drop her fight and go away quietly. She turned it down. Instead, she said she used that potential settlement money to give bonuses to all the people who had stood by her and helped her during those 11 years and to reinvest in building local capacity and relationships.
Wow.
Investing back into her people bank because, as she puts it, that's the only bank she truly trusts. Those human relationships are the ultimate safety net when other systems fail.
So how does this idea of building local strength, the people bank, connect back to solving that big red button problem, the entrenched corruption? How do you stop the bad stuff without crashing everything?
Fitz argues the way you turn the red button green, the way you fix the system without causing catastrophic disruption, is precisely by rebuilding from the ground up. It's about re-engineering money flows locally, fostering real, productive, decentralized wealth within communities.
Instead of just letting it all centralize.
Yeah, right. She believes centralization of power and finance, creating billionaires while hollowing out the middle, ultimately shrinks the pie for everyone else. She contrasts this with her experience at HUD, seeing huge sums wasted on inefficient top-down projects versus the simple effectiveness of, say, funding local efforts to buy and rehab existing homes in a neighborhood. Building real assets, real skills, real community connections that focus on resilient local economies, strong communities, underpinned by culture, and, for her, spirituality. That's the core of the practical path forward she advocates.
And finally, after laying out such, well, intense and often dark analyses, how does Catherine Fitz herself maintain perspective? How does she advise people to cope emotionally?
She talks about cultivating a state of amusement. It sounds maybe counterintuitive, but it's about recognizing the sheer, sometimes absurd theatricality of the power games she describes. Choosing not to be dragged down into paralyzing fear or despair, which, remember Turtle Fourth, she sees as a weapon used against people.
So finding the dark humor is a survival tactic.
It's a form of resilience, yeah. Maintaining that detachment, that sense of amusement, allows you to keep functioning and keep working toward solutions without being emotionally overwhelmed.
We have certainly covered a huge amount of ground in this deep dive into Catherine Fitz's perspective, from that vision of total digital control and the missing trillions to the claims of secret bases and a fundamentally different way of thinking about wealth and risk.
And understanding these ideas, even if you don't agree with all of them, however challenging or, unconventional they might seem, it's really valuable. It gives you a different lens for looking at the world, at your own finances, your security, your future. Her analysis goes way beyond the standard conversations you usually hear.
So here's something to think about. If, as Catherine Fitz suggests, the conventional financial system might be intertwined with vast sums of missing money, potentially steered by hidden policies, and may be geared towards centralizing control, where should you personally focus your energy? Where should you invest your most valuable resource, your time, your attention?
Is it purely about chasing financial returns within that system? Or is it more about building your people bank, strengthening your local community, cultivating those aspects of living wealth, skills, relationships, resilience that Fitz argues are truly enduring?
It's a challenging question she raises. If you want to explore Catherine Fitz's research further and get more detail on everything we've touched on, you can find her work and many resources on her website. That's solari.com.
And she does make a good amount of free content available there too, so you can start digging in yourself.